Day 19, 5 o'clock. That's when I woke up. Day 18 had been an absolute bore. So had 17, 16, and 15. I was an extrovert, and that many days in an apartment, completely isolated from anyone else on Earth, was hell for me. For some context, I was participating in a study of the effects of isolation on introverts and extroverts. I, like I said, was one of the latter. So about 19 days ago, I had been locked in a small apartment with enough food to last for 3 weeks. Cameras watched the living space and kitchen, and the only door was locked from both the inside and outside with a thin chain and a padlock to ensure no one could mess with the study. I sat up in bed and stared wearily around the small bedroom adjacent to the living room. Just 2 more days. 2 more days and it would be over. I'd be out, and just a little bit richer for my trouble. I fumbled on the nightstand for a pack of cigarettes and my lighter. Thank God they had agreed to let me smoke in the apartment. I didn't know if I would have been able to agree to it if that hadn't been the case. Still feeling around on the nightstand, I found my lighter, but no box of cigarettes. I blinked a few times, clearing the blurry sleep from my vision, and looked down. That was weird. There were definitely no cigarettes on the nightstand. I briefly wondered if I'd smoked a whole pack last night. I'd been up late and I tended to do that when I was tired, so it wasn't out of the question. Whatever. I pulled out the drawer of the nightstand and removed a new pack. I unwrapped it and lit up. That was better. Standing up, I made my way to the living room and stopped in the doorway, looking at the couch, the one piece of furniture in the room. I took a drag of my cigarette, just staring blankly around. One of the many things that sucked about my 3-week vacation from the outside world was the absence of a TV. I suppose they couldn't have me seeing other people, even on television. I'd even have gone for a book by day 4, but they hadn't granted me that privilege either. My boredom was tangible. Maybe breakfast would cure that. I went across the room to the kitchen, but halfway there, my shin slammed into something hard, and I cursed as I dropped my cigarette onto the carpet. Standing back, I held my shin and bit my lip. The pain quickly gave way to confusion, however. I stared blankly at the empty air I had apparently just run my shin into, not able to comprehend what had happened. I quickly replayed the experience in my mind. I had walked into the room, crossed it halfway, and then hurt my shin. What had I hit? There was nothing there. Suddenly, I noticed that the cigarette I had dropped was smoldering in the carpet. I bent to pick it up, but I stopped midway as I noticed something odd. There were 4 indentations in the rug, as if a piece of furniture had been sitting on it for a while. I looked up at the kitchen and found that the only chair was still at the table, exactly where I had left it when I'd gone to my room the previous night. I then looked back down at the indentations on the floor. A thought struck me. A crazy thought. I reached out my hand, not for the cigarette which was still burning the carpet, but for what I suspected was sitting next to it, making those dents. My hand touched something hard, and I jerked it back instinctually. There were no words to describe the confusion and, I admit, fear I felt at that moment. Still staring at the empty space, I finally stomped out the cigarette, and then I again felt for the invisible object. I found it with my hands and slowly ran them up and down its frame. Cold, hard wood. So many things ran through my head. Was I crazy? Was I tripping? Or was there, in fact, an invisible chair in the middle of the room? My legs couldn't support me, and I fell into a sitting position on the floor, still running my hands along the legs, seat, and back of the chair. I stayed like that for a long while, my thoughts running in circles. Why was it invisible? Why was it there, in the room? How and when had it gotten there? Every time I felt like I was close to some kind of logical chain of thought, my reality broke down again because nothing added up to what I was experiencing. Something impossible. Something completely impossible. Eventually, I looked up at the security camera quizzically and pointed at the chair. I knew I must look insane to whoever was watching. I was sitting on the floor, moving my hands around in what looked like empty air. I didn't know if they could hear me, but I quietly said, There's a chair in here. There's an invisible chair in here, to the camera. After an indeterminable amount of time, during which I had done nothing but continue to feel the chair, I suddenly had a new thought. What if the chair wasn't the only invisible thing in the apartment? What if there was more invisible furniture? I stood up quickly and gazed around at the rug, looking for more indentations in it. There, close to the kitchen threshold, I saw marks. I slowly crawled on my hands and knees in that direction and felt the space above the marks. This time it was a table, an invisible table. If it had been possible for me to be more surprised than I already was by the chair, I would have been. I didn't feel the table for too long, though, as another thought occurred to me. If there was an invisible chair and an invisible table in the apartment, what else could there be? Both of those objects had just appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, so was there any limit to the things that might conceivably be hiding in this collection of rooms? Hiding. That brought to mind an intrusive thought I would rather have not had. What if there was something alive in the apartment, but something alive and invisible? My mind randomly went back to the missing pack of cigarettes I knew I had left on my nightstand. I shivered, and my hair stood on end. But no, that was ridiculous. I was just scaring myself for no reason. There was no invisible creature in my apartment. Creature. Oh God, that was worse. Why had I thought of that word? I turned my back to the corner and gazed around the room, breathing heavier than usual. I was being silly. There was really no way that could be true. But when my hand brushed against the invisible table again, I realized that in a world where invisible furniture could pop into existence, it wasn't so far-fetched to imagine an invisible beast could too. There I went again, heightening the fear I was already consumed with. Beast was even worse than creature. My alarm clock going off in the bedroom at its usual 6 o'clock time roused me from the dark hole of thoughts I was falling into, and I breathed a small sigh of relief. At least something was normal. Getting to my feet and being careful to avoid running into the invisible chair again, I crossed the living room and headed for the clock on my nightstand. But in the doorway to my room, I saw something which almost made me collapse on the spot again. A pair of footprints was visible in the carpet. The carpet rose and sank slightly as invisible feet vibrated with the minuscule movements of life. I only watched for a moment, though, before I heard a deep, gravelly growl. The footprints disappeared, and something plowed into me. I screamed and pitched backward. Whatever it was ripped open my shirt and my flesh with invisible claws, leaving gashes all the way down my chest. There was blood all over me and the floor as I scrambled away, crying and gasping for breath. It caught my leg and pulled me back. I felt searing pain and kicked against it. I hit something and heard an angry growl. Hopping up on my good leg as quickly as I could, I hobbled straight for the kitchen and wrenched open a drawer, pulling out a paring knife. It was all I had, and it would have to do. I turned around again, facing the doorway to the living room. It appeared empty, but I knew that wasn't true. I could feel the invisible beast's presence. I almost imagined I could hear its breathing. Eyes wide, I watched the carpet, looking for any sign of movement. Nothing. Not footprints, and, I realized a moment later, not even indentations from the invisible chair or table. That was impossible. Or was it? I kept throwing around that word. Impossible. But was anything really impossible at this point? The invisible things had come out of nowhere. Wasn't it just as probable that they could simply disappear? I inched slowly toward that seemingly empty room beyond the kitchen, my leg and chest still bleeding. A human mind wasn't meant to be broken the way mine was being broken. The universe was playing with me, spinning me in circles and shoving me forward. I couldn't grasp my own thoughts, but I was sure I wanted to get out of that apartment. I waved frantically at the camera in the corner of the ceiling and yelled, "Let me out! Let me out now!" I could only hope someone was watching the cameras. My gaze then slid over to the chained door. I'd have to get it unlocked if they were going to be able to let me out. Where had I left the key? In the kitchen or on my nightstand? I'd been in the kitchen and I hadn't seen it. It must be the nightstand. I limped cautiously across the empty room, once again approaching my bedroom door. I glanced down at the carpet and saw no footprints, so I ventured forward, defensively holding my paring knife out in front of me. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but I continued to watch the floor for any sign of movement. I was very aware of my heavy breathing, my elevated heart rate, and the fact that I was probably losing a lot of blood. I opened the nightstand drawer and rummaged around for the key to the padlock securing the chain on the front door. Where was it? It had to be in there somewhere. I threw cartons of cigarettes, my retainer, and a chocolate bar onto the ground. Those were the only items in the drawer. The key was gone. But I was sure I'd left it in there, just as I knew I had left a pack of cigarettes on top of the nightstand. Something was playing games with me again. I followed my trail of blood back to the living room and repeatedly pounded on the door. "Let me out! Let me out!" I screamed. Finally giving up, I fell to the floor, my legs weak and my mind in shambles. I dropped my knife on the ground beside me. "Let me out," I mumbled to no one in particular. I didn't know why all this had happened, or why it had all suddenly disappeared. All I could think of was getting out. What if the beast came back? What if it was still in the room with me? What if it had just been hiding in the corner while I searched for the key? I looked up, fearful of what I would see. There were 4 indentations where the 4 feet of an invisible chair met the floor. I started crying again. If the chair was there, then it wouldn't be long until the beast was too. I heard a growl from the other side of the room. With my back slumped against the door, I picked up the meager knife in my weak hand. I stared at the footprints I could now see clearly across the room, and I listened to each deep, gargling breath the invisible creature took with mounting terror. It roared suddenly, and I braced myself. Then, the chain above my head snapped, and the door behind me swung open into the outside world. I fell prostrate onto my back. Bright light washed over me. I blinked and tried to make out my surroundings, but everything was so blurry. I felt hands pick me up by the arms, and someone dragged me away from the doorway. I could hear 2 men talking, one on either side of me. "Hey buddy, it's okay, you're safe now," one of them said. "Man, that stuff they gave him really did a number on him. Good thing that chain was weak. The guy's holding the key and couldn't even manage to use it," said the other. I looked down at the paring knife in my hand. But it wasn't a paring knife. It was a key, and it was covered in sticky blood. That was strange. The 2 men hauled me up onto my feet, and the taller of the 2 examined my chest and leg with interest. "Did you do that to yourself, man?" he asked. "What? No, the creature. The invisible... It attacked me," I mumbled. "Looks to me like you messed yourself up with that key," said the other, shorter man as the 2 of them walked me away from the door. It suddenly occurred to me that they'd left it open. I tried to turn around and look, but they held me firmly. "That thing's going to get out! It's going to get out! Close the door!" I screamed at them. They just ignored me. They looked at each other, and the shorter man said, "Okay, that stuff messed him up really good." "Close the door!" I screamed again. The men stopped, and the taller man said to me, "Look, there's nothing there. It's all in your imagination. You're hallucinating. If there's something escaping from that room, then why can't we see it?" I whispered, "Because it's invisible." At that moment, the taller man's neck ripped open in 3 places, spraying blood everywhere. The shorter man let go of my arm, and I ran for my life. Thank you for listening. If you want more, consider subscribing and hitting the bell for more stories every week. Good night, and sleep well, if you can.